Merci. Kia matin, Larissa Crawford de Schnickelschön. Hello, good morning. My name is Larissa Crawford. As a guest residing in Toronto and all of Ontario, I want to first acknowledge the traditional territories of the Mississauga of New Credit First Nation, of the Anishinaabe, of the Haudenosaunee, of the Wendat, of the Métis, of the Cree Indigenous peoples. We continue to demand justice, sovereignty, and full nation-to-nation relationship. So, a couple months ago, I was one of 200 experts invited to this international policy summit. And so I get there, and I'm super excited. I'm dressed professionally, and I get to the registration table. And I'm asked by, I'm sure, a well-meaning registration volunteer, are you in the right place? And I say, yeah, I'm actually a speaker, too. And so I stand around the table for about 10 to 15 minutes. Not a single other person had been asked that question. So I'm going into this grand ballroom already feeling like I look like I don't belong. And I get into the grand ballroom, and there's about 200 experts and then 100 volunteers. And I get this rush. And it's a feeling that too many racialized and Indigenous peoples feel when they go into spaces where decisions are being made. And that was that I was the only identifiable Black person in that room. When we tried to have a round table, a youth round table, we couldn't fill a room with people under 25. And we're making decisions on climate change. And so, as the least important person, really, in these rooms, I had to stand face to face with some of the most powerful CEOs in the world. And I had to eventually go on stage and challenge them on what they were saying and how they were saying it, on who had a voice in that space and who didn't, on the fact that their way of knowing wasn't the only, and in that context, even the most important way of knowing. And I had to do this because I was the only person in that space willing and able to do that. Now I say I had to, because I regard that as my responsibility as a community member, but also my responsibility coming from the privilege I have of being educated in Western institutions, but also in community and traditional knowledge. In my privilege of being able to access my right to those decision-making tables as a community member, where too often my people are missing from those decision-making tables, but are most adversely impacted by those decisions. So when I think about what I do, and when I think about what my mentors and my superheroes do, it's useful to understand it as community to boardroom activism. I am an activist. I put action to my words. And I understand myself, I understand my identity, my values, the kind of impact that I want to make. I understand I, relative to my community, as an integral part of my community. And so I bring that activism into the boardroom, maybe under different guise, maybe with different language, but still staying true to those community-centered social justice goals. Now, this can be hard, because not everyone is going to want their racial bias, blatant racism, homophobia, xenophobia, ableism, their patriarchy, their settler colonial perspectives outed or challenged. You may experience lost opportunities, which sucks as a youth trying to get into a sector or career. You may experience microaggressions or outright hostility. And so what I want to speak to is a tool, one simple tool that I do before engaging in spaces where I know my identity, values, and sense of purpose will be challenged. And I do so that I have the confidence, I have the tactics, I have the supports that I need to maintain the work that I do. So I want everyone to get out pen or paper if you have any, but I know for most of you this is going to be the notes feature on your phone. And I want us, we are going to make outlines, we're going to make action plans. And so I'm a researcher. I love methodologies, I love action planning, and a choice favorite is results-based management. And what this methodology does, it has you look at the impact that you want to make. And it orients smaller goals to make sure that you're achieving that impact. But then it also makes you look at what you need to achieve the smaller goals, to achieve all the goals, so that you're always working with purpose. So the first table is going to be an action plan for impact. Then we're going to look at a second table, an action plan for self-preservation. And this is where you're really going to identify what's important to you and how are you going to protect that. So I'm going to use examples of an action plan that I made for the action plans that I made for myself when I started my position as an Indigenous Policy Advisor intern with the Ontario Ministry of Energy, Northern Development and Mines. And so when I looked at, okay, what do I want to do? I created this action plan. Short-term, medium-term, long-term. This is going to act as your timeline. So for me, it was at the end of my 6-month internship. I then made 2 rows, goals. So outlining the goals that you want to achieve within those time blocks. And then the inputs, the key resources, and the key actions that you need to take to achieve all the goals to eventually get to the impact that you want to make. And so for me, part of our unit's work is doing duty to consult assessments. So we ensure that developers are meeting the standards of Indigenous consultation with big energy projects. And so when I'm working on duty to consult assessments, when I look at what kind of impact do I want to make by doing this work, I want to build lasting relationships with the First Nations I work with on these assessments. In order to do that, I'm going to make sure that when possible, I'm going to attend community events, and I'm going to follow up after a case is done. Now, after I have that idea, then I'm able to orient smaller goals to position myself in a place where I can enact that impact. So I looked at, okay, what do I have to do to get there? I need to be able to start working on the assessments. But in order to do that, so that's my goal, at the 2-month period, I want to be able to work on these assessments. I'm going to need to take a workshop. I need to understand what they are. I then look at, okay, what do I want to achieve after that in order to get me one step closer? I need to take lead on a duty to consult assessment. In order to do that, I need to work on about 15 assessments. And so doing this planning, leading to the impact, is so important to make sure that your actions are with purpose. And working with a supervisor is such a great way, and a mentor and your peers, is such a great way to identify inputs that you may have never even considered. Now I'm going to go to the self-preservation table. So this is where you're really thinking through what is important to me about my identity, about my community, about the work that I do. What do I need to protect in order to continue to do this work? So you're going to make 2 columns. You're going to make the values and the tactics. And so in values, I look at, and so I'm going to use 3 examples. You can do as many rows as you want, but for time's sake. I value myself. I value my well-being. So I ask myself, what does self-care look like to me? And for me, when I look at the tactics, protest is a very simple way that I enact self-care. Because working in offices, working around people who just maybe don't get it, it's frustrating. You want to be angry, you want to yell, you want to cry. At protests and at marches, you can do that. It's healthy to do that. You're around a community who get it, who want to do action, who you can network it with. Just like at a conference, networking. And so to me, protest is a way that I enact self-care. Saying no. I was recently diagnosed with a chronic pain disability, and I actually just got a new shiny cane, too. And so understanding when to say no has become an integral part of my self-care regime. When I look at my value of family, how do I make sure that I'm spending more time with my family than at work? And so in considering this before entering or soon after entering my position, I was able to go to my phenomenal managers, and we worked out a work-at-home schedule. And then another step that I took is I make sure that when I do go in the office, I go early enough to be able to pick up my toddler so then I can take her to her dad's football practice. And so doing this and identifying this beforehand, I'm able to protect that value. This one's important. How do I claim my identity in this space? So as a Black Indigenous woman, and community member, how do I make sure that I protect that identity and that I claim that identity? And so for me, sometimes it's wearing my natural fro out when I'm facilitating training. It could be wearing my moccasins to the government office. But it could be a bit louder, too. Like the skirt. I decided to wear this skirt today. I made this skirt. The art of sewing has connected generations of my family. And learning how to make a ribbon skirt signified a milestone in my cultural journey. But equally as important as what it is what it says. So the ribbon skirt is in itself a symbol of power and resistance. And I created this ribbon skirt to speak to the power of when Black and Indigenous communities come together, when we align our resistance, and when we connect to the land, and learn from the land and respect the land. Because when we don't, when our communities are fragmented, then we lose power in our resistance, we lose connection to that land. Just a couple weeks ago, I was in Paris in front of a stage, on a global stage in front of thousands. And I structured my speech in a way that I could stand up and use my red dress and the red dress movement to insert a call to action for missing, murdered Indigenous women. And I got a really emotional reaction from the audience who had no idea that we were experiencing this crisis. So what you wear can be such a tactful way to insert your call to action, to insert the important messages that you need to bring to spaces where these topics, where these issues aren't being spoken about. And so in doing this action plan and doing that second table, what you're really doing is planning out how you can be bold, how you can claim that space in a very strategic and intelligent way. So when we look at what we just did, table 1, impact, or action plan for impact, we're looking at what you want to do in your role and how you're going to achieve that, and what you need to achieve that. In table 2, we looked at more introspective considerations on how can I protect, how can I maintain my identity, my values, and how can I act in those spaces as a community member. And so, doing this planning, even if you never look at those papers again, doing this planning is so important, and it ensures that when you go into boardroom spaces, that you're acting with self-integrity, with community integrity, and that your actions are purposeful towards an impact that you want to make. Now, my time is up, but I want to leave with one message. I understand that activists and people who want to help, there's this overwhelming, crushing pressure that you need to care about everything, you need to say something about everything, you need to do something about everything, you need to do it all appropriately. And this message comes from a tweet from Lin-Manuel Miranda. He is the writer of some of your favorite Moana songs. And he says, "You cannot let all the world's tragedies into your heart, you'll drown. But the ones you do let in should count. Let them manifest action." Thank you, Mercy.